Well, as you saw the notice, we are recording the meeting so that we can actually put it online, so members who are not able to be here today can follow the discussion. So the program for today is that we are going to be talking about goal 2 of the IRCT strategy. I will start by situating us in the strategy just very briefly. Then we will move to James and Rhona, who will be talking about the first part of goal 2, so the exposing torture part, and really focusing on some of the things that that are in the strategy where there's, let's say, more potential and possibility for members to participate. And we will, following their presentation, Dastan and I will cover issues primarily related to UN and EU, and again, focusing on those parts of the work where there's possibility for member participation. If my sound becomes unclear at some point, please do let me know, and I will turn off the camera or do something else to switch it. Bertha, you look like you're already skipped. It's good. Okay, thank you. All right. So maybe just to situate us in where we are in all of this. Beginning 2021, the IRCT started its development of a new strategy. What we did was that we actually looked back through the last strategic period to look at all the different and analyze all the different feedback that we had already gotten from members. Okay, bad connection. No, okay. Sorry, I'm so nervous with this connection that I interpret any kind of gesture as being, this is bad. Okay, so sorry for that. So we analyzed all of the feedback that we had gotten from the membership throughout the strategic period to understand why is it that members want to be a member of the IRCT? What is it that they want to get out of or do as part of this organization? And that analysis led to 2 very clear ideas, which were that members want to be part of this organization. 1, to support each other, to give the strongest or best possible rehabilitation support to torture victims. And 2, to be part of the broader fight against torture, both in their own country, which they already are, but also in their regions and globally. So let's say to put their chips in the same basket as a lot of other people to try to generate a more global pressure to get justice, to get prevention, of course, and of course reparation to victims. So that was our hypothesis, which we tested out with the membership through a number of different consultations throughout 21. And that generated a very rich, I think, body of substance to what that hypothesis actually looked like in practice. And the result of that process is the strategy that we have today, with 2 main components, healing being 1, where the implementation of that is to be driven through member-to-member input. And then the justice component, or the let's say the broader fight against torture component in goal 2, where the Secretariat for some processes need to take a more executing role, but at the same time where there's a huge scope for member engagement, both in relation to your own countries, but also in relation to more global efforts that we are doing. And that's what we are going to be talking about today. So I'm not gonna be speaking anymore in the introduction for now. I'm just gonna hand over, just to maybe recall for those who don't have the strategy super fresh in mind, that it has, the goal 2 has 3 main components: exposing torture, changing or improving laws and policies to fight torture, and finally strengthening capacity both of civil society and state institutions. So that's our theory of how we can actually make a real impact in the world. So first, show that it happens, so that there's no discussion about whether it exists and it's a problem. 2, change all of the structures that need to be in place to actually make things better, and 3, make sure that everyone who needs to be involved in actually making these structures reality know what they have to do and how to do it. So that's our theory. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Rhona and James to start with the exposing torture part and to talk about some of the specific initiatives there. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry. They say caffeine takes 20 minutes to hit your system, and it's only hasn't been quite 20 minutes yet. It's 5 a.m. here in Hawaii, just for you to know. So while I struggle through the first 3 minutes, bear with me, please. As Asger mentioned, it's great to see everyone here, and Rhona and I are particularly delighted to be able to present some of our more upcoming and I think even hopefully you will find exciting initiatives for this year and for the next 3 years period under the new strategy. To put a little bit more what Asger has mentioned into concrete, let's say, terms, undergo, as he has mentioned, undergo 2.1 and 2.3 on exposing torture and capacity building. We really have principally 3 types of activities. First, as many of you are aware, we continue to do a lot of the casework with the independent forensic expert group. The casework on exposing torture encompasses several activities. If I'm speaking a bit too fast for the interpretation, would you please tell me? Okay. Well, anyhow, interpreters, if I'm speaking too fast, please halt me, but I go on to auto drive at 5 a.m. So things just come out. So, okay. Anyhow, the casework, it includes several things. It includes medical legal reports, so supporting qualified NGOs around the world, as well as both international and local, and supporting cases, strategic cases that they're filing. That is both medical legal evaluations. Very often as well, we work together with different NGOs on reviewing evidence. So if you've seen, for example, the report on Belarus recently produced, and you'll understand what the work encompasses. As well, we're reviewing evidence, photographs of protest, other things, both from journalists, Human Rights Watch, and different NGOs around the world. So that's our casework. Our capacity building, as always, has encompassed, trainings, workshops, as well as the development of tools. We will be speaking a little bit about that in just a few minutes, Rhona and I. So I'll put that aside for now. And then we do a bit of policy work. In terms of policy work, many of you know that, or if you've been reading the updates Lisa has been sending, that the Istanbul Protocol has been under a update process for now the last 6 years. But that's 4 years on our side and 2 years for the OHCHR, the United Nations, to finalize it. It is a process that involves 190 experts spanning 51 countries, including approximately 50 experts from the membership, and involving 31 member centers. This has been a very rigorous and painstaking, painful process led by us, as well as 3 of the other leading NGOs, Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, the Redress, and Physicians for Human Rights, together with the United Nations anti-torture bodies. So the SBT, the Committee Against Torture, the UN Voluntary Fund, and the Special Rapporteur. And I'm glad to announce that it will be published in, we're told, June of this year. I think we will finally make that deadline. I actually just reviewed the layout proofs last week, so it is already in the layout and editing phase. And in addition to that, as Kathy knows, and others, we are working with a group of experts together to develop guidelines now on how to conduct remote evaluations that will parallel the Istanbul Protocol. That will be a production that I hope and the membership you'll over in about a month and a half, everyone will hear about it because it is going through a process where the guidelines are being drafted, and then it will be shared with the entire membership for your comments, so that we ensure we create guidelines which are internationally applicable and, let's say, sensitive to the different contexts in which we work. Yes, a bit of a challenging ask, but we will see how we do. So Rhona and I will spend the next, let's say, 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. That's just 7 minutes on my side and the rest on Rhona, speaking about some of our other activities that we wanted to highlight, where Asger mentioned we're particularly interested in your comments or your input, as well as your engagement moving forwards. The first will be from my side, the Istanbul Protocol online blended learning curriculum. So as many of you know, if you've been reading the updates, we have been developing since last year a online learning curriculum. We call it the blended learning curriculum because this is an online curriculum attached to a in-person training curriculum for the Istanbul Protocol. Now, why are we doing this? The IRCT over the last 15 years or so has been doing Istanbul Protocol trainings. It's just as one of the core activities that we've been functioning with. Ourselves, we have been doing approximately 6 to 15 trainings a year. And if you've been part of one of these Istanbul Protocol trainings, you'll know that they span around 2 to 5 days. The core curriculum, we say, based on a model curriculum that we developed, in fact, on the Istanbul Protocol, spans 5 days. So that's 5 days where a multidisciplinary team, so in fact, a lawyer, psychologist, and a medical doctor who are experts in this will go to a place and will conduct a training. As you can imagine, this has been very resource intensive. In fact, I've probably had discussions about doing Istanbul Protocol trainings with several of you. And usually one of the biggest bottlenecks in the ability to conduct trainings and to build capacity in this area has been the resources necessary, the intensive resources in conducting a training. The cost of flying in 3 experts, the time, having a hotel for 5 days, bringing everyone to this place, feeding them, keeping them interested and entertained, and then, and otherwise. So what we have been trying to do over the last several months is to develop an online curriculum. What this curriculum does is, through 10 modules, it breaks down the core components of what we generally do in an Istanbul Protocol training, covering basically the basics of what one has to understand to have a conceptual understanding of how to do a, we keep saying Istanbul Protocol, investigation or documentation of torture according to the Istanbul Protocol. In principle, meaning a process of documentation, right, or investigation, a medical legal one. So both medical and psychological documentation of torture in a process that is understanding of the experience that torture victims undergo, the impact that torture has on them, and with a human rights perspective. A human rights perspective, meaning, for example, that as experts, we understand that even though there may not be evidence of torture, right, physical or psychological, an individual doesn't mean that the individual has not been tortured themselves. A traditional forensic perspective or forensic, investigatory perspective by forensic doctors or police or prosecutors, probably in all of your national contexts, being that if you don't find evidence, the crime didn't happen. right? And so it's this specific perspective and all of our understanding of torture that we try to, this is what we mean by Istanbul protocol training, right? And this is what we try to convey through 10 specific components, spanning from what is torture to psychological and medical evidence to ethical issues and teamwork, which is an important component. Each module is in fact only 40 minutes. Right, so and it's about an 8-hour module, and the purpose is really to do two things: to increase accessibility and to empower. Accessibility in terms of making the ability to learn about the Istanbul Protocol accessible to everyone. I mean, the course is going to be open for members as well as for members to conduct their own trainings when working with others. Empowerment in terms of both providing the knowledge and tools necessary or helpful for you to do forensic documentation, but as well as for you to then work with local stakeholders on both policy issues as well as practically. Working with prosecutors, working with others on, and because one of the other challenges, I guess, with with sharing this kind of knowledge is obviously that training is in itself a skill or a tool that we have tried to pass on throughout the years to different member centers through trainings, trainer of trainers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully this will in some ways help to facilitate that process in a resource light manner. And then on top of the 10 modules, we will have 2 additional modules. So in the past, if you may have seen, the IP trainings we do are always multidisciplinary, but lawyers seem to ask too many questions about different things. So what we have, I see Susan's laughing because she understands. And so what we've done is actually to develop 2 specific modules addressing specific aspects or needs of legal professionals on how we actually assess medical legal reports, so they know what what to do when they get them, and covering the core challenges of interviewing victims of torture, so issues of credibility, memory loss, the effects of psychological trauma on chronology, this kind of thing. So we have that coming up. It's in development. The 10 modules will be released in sets, and I'm sort of hesitant in such a large group to commit to timelines. So, but I will just because. We should, and then maybe we'll achieve it. The first module set will be released hopefully in April, probably in the beginning or mid-April, or well, in April now. So that's the first 3, and then we will keep them rolling out in sets. So probably 4 to 6 will be released in July together with the new updated Istanbul Protocol, and then 7 to 10 will be released in the fall sometime. And I think the 2 modules specific to lawyers and legal practitioners will be released in the beginning of next year. So that's what we have coming up. Do we have any questions or thoughts? I mean, what do you think? Anything? Okay. Well, we've made Mariana and Susan happy, so that's like enough work for today.
From Zimbabwe, we've been wanting this training for a long time, so I'm super excited to hear that. And I have questions already, but I think I need to save them for when the modules come out. That's great, thank you.
But really, if anybody has questions at any point, just raise your hand. I mean, it's best if this is interactive, yeah? So don't be shy.
So I push a little bit more. Are there anyone out there beyond Susan and Marianne? We see you laughing here, ready to go. Are people have you thought about using this? You've been waiting on the edge of your chair for 4 or 5 years now. Are there other centers that are lined up to do some training on this or really need it badly? I'd love to hear from you if you are.
can see Maria Angeles is clapping on the chat, so maybe that means
Okay. Sayar have a need for it. No, because it's not really, I'm not trying to be facetious here, right? There's been an awful lot of work put into this. So it's just interesting for us to be able to understand if there's a real need for this, or is it just nice to have, right? So I don't know, maybe from Zimbabwe or Mariana, if you want to put a few more words on why you will use this or what you will do with this, maybe it will inspire others to do it. But it's also to get some conversation.
I think in Zimbabwe, we are having a by-election this coming weekend, and we're having a presidential election next year. We always have a horrendous spike in torture and state brutality around elections. I think we've also got a very fractured civil society where people are trying their best to do what they can, but having an international policy or guideline will give us a lot more leverage relating to how we document things, how we showcase things, the evidence we collect. I'm a trauma therapist, so I do the psychological stuff. I work with Zimbabwe lawyers for human rights. I work with the adult rape clinic. I work with Zimbabwe doctors for human rights. So we've got that medical, legal, and I'm like psychological support. Sorry, I'm with Tree of Life. I do stuff for them here in Zimbabwe. And I know that none of us recently have had Istanbul training. And I did a chat with the Zimbabwe lawyers for human rights around trauma-informed care interviewing, because, yeah, we're just realizing that we've got such a prevalence of torture. And I mean, what we call torture, state brutality in all different ways. And we need to generate better evidence. And we in Zimbabwe, we're not signatories to any of the anti-torture conventions or anything. So where do we go with that? How do we advocate? How do, you talk about justice, reparations, accountability. How do we even do that in Zimbabwe? Because we've got no mechanism. So on one hand, I'm listening going, this is great. And then when I've got all the evidence, who's going to come for me? Because where do I go with that? So a lot of my questions were related to safety and documentation and data management and things like that. But on the other hand, we need to do this better because, yeah, we're kind of not going anywhere. So that's, for me in Zimbabwe, I'm really excited. And I feel like our other players need to know that this is coming. Our Zimbabwe lawyers for human rights need to know this is coming. The Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum need to know it's available. We can't all come to Europe, so having it online is going to be amazing. It's really exciting for us.
Thank you very much for painting some pictures for us, right, of exactly why. That helps us a lot. Marianne, if you would like to hop in here, or
Sure. We do a lot of training. I'm in Chicago with the Marjorie Kovler Center, and we do a lot of training ourselves on interviewing survivors. That's with the legal community. We also train a lot of graduate students who wind up doing psychological affidavits. And we work with volunteer physicians who do the medical documentation. So, I would say since I was last officially trained probably 20 years ago, it will be great to have an upgrade and to be more universal about its application and all the tenets being, more consistent, I would say. And I feel like our context is not quite as dramatic as Susan's, and yet Chicago is known as a place where Chicago police were systematically torturing African-American prisoners for many, many years. And it was the work of a doctor who collaborated a lot with IRCT with the first group that developed the Istanbul Protocol, that we were able to actually break into that and document torture and move forward in that process of prosecution. Thanks.
Excellent. Again, thank you very much for new members on the call, but people who haven't maybe heard before the depth of both the history here, but also the need to have this retraining. So I'm happy to say that This will be something that can bring us all up to speed, and it should be universal in nature. Are there any others? Sorry, James and Rhona, I'm kind of hijacking, but I just want to get others speaking. Is there anybody else who would like to do the same? Give us a bit of a taste of what it's like in Ireland or in Spain or in other countries around the world. I'm trying to scan who's online here with us. Okay, otherwise we pop back over. So it's back to Rhona. No, James?
Why don't you go?
Perfect. Thanks so much. Great. Well, thanks everybody so much for coming. It's great to see you. Please feel free to also put on your cameras because I really enjoy seeing faces, but I understand if you're in your pajamas or anything and don't want to appear today. I'm hoping I can, even though we're now at switched time zones, I sort of feel like because I presented at 6 a.m., I may be running out of brain juice by 4 p.m., but I'll do my best. But please feel free to, as everyone else has said, ask questions, comment anytime. That's exactly what we're here for. So, but so specifically, I wanted to talk about a specific section of the piece of work that James and I do together. That so within the advocacy team, I think, James, did you talk about the thematic areas? I think that, but essentially we have 3 key thematic focuses in our casework, one of which focuses specifically around issues of police brutality, which I was pleased to hear Susan talking about, because hopefully, at least, at very least for you, but hopefully for other people, this topic will be particularly relevant. So essentially, for over the course of the past, I want to say a couple of years. I mean, I've been here for just over a year, and I've been working on this the whole time with James and I, and also one of the IFAC doctors, Rohini Har, who works at the Human Rights Center for the University of Berkeley in California. We've been developing a set of tools to essentially help protesters, individuals, to document violations of or torture, acts of torture or ill treatment that they've experienced during protest or subsequently whilst being detained in response to their participation in a protest. So this kind of, just to give a little quick insight into the context, I suppose, although I know it's very much part of everybody's work here. This is kind of very much inspired by our feeling that, or our observations that the ways in which people are protesting is changing quite a lot. Around sort of 2020, we saw a real sort of surge of protests around the time of the coronavirus outbreak, and also around the time of the George Floyd case, but that really occurred sort of around different countries, but with surprisingly similar patterns of disproportionate use of force against protesters by state officials. And also quite a surprisingly but impressively coordinated response sometimes by protesters, including by particularly young people, in terms of how they go about preparing for protests and participating in them, and responding to, for example, the use of certain like riot control equipment. So we saw people like sort of in the US and Palestine exchanging resources with each other and things like that. And that, yeah, to pick up on what I just said as well, in particular, we're seeing quite a lot more young people protesting than perhaps has been the case. I mean, of course, throughout history, young people have always engaged in protest, but particularly since like the climate movement, for example, we've seen younger and younger people being particularly interested in, you know, taking to the streets to voice their complaints, and also relevant to what you were saying, Susan. As I was saying in the previous session as well, I know that in certain countries, I mean, the medium of protest is really essential to people to be as a venue through which to voice their grievances. In countries where, you know, the court system is unreliable, and a lot of public institutions, even though they're supposed to be, you know, ombudsman, and they're supposed to exist primarily for the function of receiving complaints about human rights violations, for example, are essentially not effective. So in some contexts, protests are really like at least a weekly occurrence, while they may be somewhat less so in, for example, in the UK, where I'm from. But so essentially, we wanted to put together that this. our toolkit so far consists of 2 key tools, which I'm going to try and present to you guys today, and I'm very interested to hear your opinions. But the key,
Rhona, just
Yeah.
one thing, if you can try to speak slower
sorry.
for the interpreter.
Sorry, I'm also probably, this is my attempts to also caffeinate myself. Sorry about that. I'll try to slow down a bit. But so really the key goal behind developing these tools was to try and empower individuals to be able to both to document their injuries and their experiences, any evidence they have of any violations that they've suffered whilst participating in a protest. But also in a way that they can do so without having to go through the medium of, the court system or other organizations or individuals who act as sort of sometimes benevolently, but sometimes less so, as gatekeepers to them being able to report those kind of incidents. So for those who were here last time, I'm going to switch this up and do this the opposite way around, but I'm going to try and share my screen. Sorry, bear with me one sec. Perfect. Okay. Great. So, can you see my colorful PDF? Excellent. Yeah. So, yes, none of us have had PowerPoint presentations so far, so hopefully this will be nice. A boost of color to wake us all up for a second. So essentially, this is the first of the 2 tools that we've been working on. As you can perhaps see by the shape of it, it's actually designed not as a regular PDF, but as something that's specifically very friendly to use on a phone. So that when you open the PDF on your phone, you can scroll quite easily through it, and it should fill the full screen. But this is very much, designed in a way that it's meant to be very visually appealing and easy for people to use and for easy reference, essentially. So in terms of also, the context in which the tool is meant to be used more broadly, it gives guidance on both how to report these incidents and injuries, and how to document them thoroughly after a protest has occurred. But it also gives some guidance as to how individuals can go about preparing for participating in protests, and also during the course of whilst they're at the scene of a protest. So if we, and also maybe just to say a word about what this means for you guys in particular, this isn't something that, I mean, you'll have to sort of see the 2 tools to see exactly what I mean about this, but I'm sure you'll be thinking about it as we go through just to note. For you guys as rehabilitation organizations, we're not suggesting that you specifically directly adopt this guidance in any way. This is something that, in the same way as we intended it for individuals and for protesters, it's something that we would hope would serve as a tool for you as well to use in the way that you would best see fit with your client pool, but also with partner organizations who may work with individuals who are often involved in these kind of situations, who attend protests that often result in violence. And also, as we heard from some of our attendees from the previous session, it's something that you could potentially use, for example, in your work with training NPMs, or work with other organizations. But essentially what it tries to do is gather some of the principles that are contained within the Istanbul Protocol about how to do effective documentation of injuries resulting from torture and experiences, and tries to distill them into guidance that the general public can use and understand in common language. So just to give you a sneak peek, so it has 4 key sections essentially. And the focus of this tool in particular is to sort of guide people on how to take photos and videos in relation to primarily, first of all, things that they may witness during the protest in terms of acts of violence that they may want to take photos of or try to take footage of, later to serve as proof of the fact that police violence has occurred. Also to collect physical evidence like gas canisters or bullet casings and things like that they may want to use as proof. Also, as I mentioned, how to take photos of their injuries in a way that makes sense to us as you know, forensic. Well, I don't want to call myself a forensic expert, maybe one day, but forensic professionals for doctors and for human rights organizations who receive these kind of complaints from individuals so that they can take photos in a way that makes their injuries most visible and interpretable, and so that we know what body part, for example, we're looking at. And yeah, and I sort of went into the fourth one whilst talking about that as well. So essentially, to give you a little look at this, they're really laid out in a way where, so we worked with a illustrator to put these together, and they're quite simple pieces of guidance that are overlaid onto the images themselves. So we go through the first section, which, as I mentioned, I believe kind of occurs mostly at the scene of the protest. So telling people, for example, the kind of details that are useful for them to try and photograph, for us to try and understand what occurred during the protest, who might have been involved in terms of perpetrators, specifically what kind of types of substances or riot control equipment they might have used against those individuals. Also some kind of general information about how to make also their video footage most interpretable, you know, without sort of interfering noises, and in ways that we can best try and understand the context of what we're seeing. Also kind of general advice about you know, protecting yourself during the protest whilst in the process of trying to document what's going on. And also, as I wanted to mention, about how to store the data that you then collect via these images and videos that are taken during the protest. Okay, and I will skip to this next section. So as I mentioned, also there's some general guidance about you know, trying to collect physical evidence that may be available on the scene of the protest, and also to try and do it in a safe way. And specifically, things like this, I think, are sort of rarely found in other types of, there are, of course, other examples of guidance that are available to protesters about, you know, what kind of legal organization can you call with a complaint, and lots of different things like that are circulating, but there's very little that offers, I think, from what I've been able to see, you know, forensic expertise that's distilled into this kind of guidance in terms of what people should bear in mind when they're, you know, picking up pieces of evidence and trying to take photos. So this is something that should really help them be able to, you know, make their complaints as compliant as possible with the kind of documentation principles that we're used to working with. So, for example, if some kind of substance is used against them in terms of as a method of crowd control, then this, for example, advises them not to throw away their clothes and to store them in the correct method so that evidence can then be used later. Perfect. Sorry, tell me if I'm also getting too croaky as I'm going through this. And of course, as I think I mentioned before, in terms of both the physical evidence and the images, we advise people to label what they're actually sending us, which some of you might have also experienced, kind of receiving these like sort of blurry photos where you don't quite know what body part you're looking at or what injury. So in that sense, this is also something that hopefully will facilitate our role, you know, as people who often receive complaints from alleged victims of torture who've experienced this kind of situation. Okay, and then as I mentioned, I will skip through this a little bit quickly here so that I can get onto the next tool, but there's some additional guidance on talking about or advising the individual on how to best recount their story in a way that's essentially understandable, but also goes into enough detail about what specifically happened to them, and also trying to kind of encourage them to tell it. Of course, I won't go into the details that you already know about the challenges of telling a torture survivor story in a chronological way, but essentially to try and address those kind of issues. And then, as I mentioned, trying to cover sort of trying to educate the person on the types of injuries that they may have suffered, and how they can best try and sort of help us understand by describing you know, the color, the shape, the size, the pattern of injuries, what precisely those look like. Perfect. And as I mentioned, this also goes into how to take, how best to take photos of their injuries in a way that, that shows different angles. And so from full body to medium to close-ups. And and labels this evidence, exactly. And then this actually leads into our second tool, which the two are sort of combined here. But I just wanted to ask, does anybody already have some questions or comments about this specific set of guidance? If not, I'll just jump into the next one.
So again, this was stimulated. I'll just hop in 2 seconds. It was stimulated by people asking, you know, what they could do when they were in situations like this, where they were experiencing things that they thought looked like systematic torture or violence from the police. So it was a demand-driven piece of work here. Again, we hope very much, not that it maybe is not for everybody, but it would be good to be able to circulate it and get the word out that tools like this exist. And IRCT is not the only one doing this, but please help us to get the word out if you find this useful. And if you don't, also please let us know.
Perfect. Marianne, do you have a question?
Yeah, so this tool could be freely shared with the public? That's a question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, well, something I forgot to show you. Sorry, I should have mentioned this. So this comes in PDF form, but it also comes in the form of an Instagram page, which you're totally free to decide if one of these platforms is better for you than another. But I should have mentioned that, I mean, this was also the reason why I was talking about young people a lot at the start, is we also wanted to make this as easily shareable as possible, essentially. So the version that I'm showing you is a PDF format, which can be shared over WhatsApp or Signal or whatever messaging service works best for you and your partners, or of course email. But essentially, we've assumed that it will be most sort of easily accessible for people when it's used on their phone. Or there's also the Instagram page, which I can actually pop out to. Sorry guys, are you seeing still the PDF? In which case I'll switch this back. Okay.
Rhona, I think you should just circulate the Instagram page afterwards, otherwise, because you don't have so much time left.
Sure. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, in that case, I will move back to the PDF. But yes, anyway, sorry, I hope that answered your question, Arian. Great, thank you very much. Okay, perfect. So yeah, so towards the end of this tool, it links to our other tool, which is essentially a set of documentation forms, which go somewhat more in detail into some of these the questions and the pieces of guidance that we've presented here, but essentially serves as a set of forms. So it's 16 pages, but and I should mention that both of these tools are now available in 6 languages. So they should be shared. We're hoping to have all of the links and everything available within the next day or so. So you'll all be hearing about this again. But these essentially serve as a set of forms for individuals to be able to record in detail what happened to them whilst attending a protest in terms of the specific injuries they sustain, to be able to submit the photos that they were able to collect with the same sort of set of guidance as to how to best take photos that can serve as forensic evidence. And also details about their specific experiences in terms of like what the torture or ill treatment that they suffered consisted of, and also if they experienced any of that in detention, what that consisted of as well. So just generally to say, so these forms are set up in a way that, you know, they're very much written in a way so that individuals can use them. They're again in quite in common language, and we've given individuals the opportunity to identify themselves or not as they prefer, but there are certain details which may be required, say, to be able to commit to submit a legal complaint, which are left out. So this is essentially, you know, more of a focus tool for the individual support the individual in being able to record the most relevant parts of their experience, which of course can be time sensitive in terms of injuries and in terms of course, trauma if it's resulting from a traumatic incident or traumatic experience during a protest. So these essentially, I won't go into too much detail, of course, because we don't have a lot of time, but these give a little bit of guidance that across each part of the form, essentially on the kind of details that are useful for individuals to provide. And also specifically within both the protest and the detention sections, there's these I think might be particularly of interest to you. They provide the sort of prompts as to the types of kind of incidents or techniques that individuals may have been subjected to whilst experiencing violence during a protest. And there's also slightly different data options available for the detention section. But this is also something that might be useful to you within your organizations in terms of data that you might be interested in collecting. So as we said before, you're not obliged in any way to kind of adopt this form if whilst dealing with victims of police brutality. But this might be something that sort of serves as a useful tool for you and your staff and anybody that you might be training in terms of like prompts for what serves as useful information whilst dealing with people that have experienced those kind of incidents. And I'm just aware of time constraints. I don't want to run over too much with this, but I'll just check if there's something in particular I need to mention. But yeah, so it goes through essentially the protest section, so general information in which the person can identify themselves or not, protest section, and then a detention section, which also asks about whether they received medical attention whilst in detention, and also some information about their due process rights. And also, sorry, I forgot to mention, the conditions under which the medical examination was conducted. So to some extent, that also kind of engages with the standards under the Istanbul Protocol about, well, of course, whether the person was able to give informed consent, if the medical exam was conducted in private or not, if it was an effective full body examination, i.e. whether they were fully undressed or not. And of course, in terms of the injuries section as well, we offer body diagrams, which are hopefully useful to individuals as well, and laid out in a way that's sort of meant for kind of layman comprehension, in the sense that they're laid out in a way that's as if you were looking in a mirror, so that you can kind of use the form yourself and try to kind of use this to indicate the pattern of your injuries, and using some of the guidance that we give here at the site to try and find a way to best describe or to use this guidance, sorry, to best describe like the shape, the pattern, the nature of your injuries, essentially. And of course, there's the front and the back there. Exactly. Perfect. So that is essentially it. So yeah, the PDFs and the Instagram tool, which also comes in PDF format, will be available online, I'm hoping within the next day. So you will be contacted about this again very soon. But I just wonder if anybody has any questions specifically about the forms, the illustrated guidance, or anything. Any comments are very welcome. Or anything I missed, James or Asger or anyone.
Maybe put a few more words, if there are no questions, to how, how the intended use. I think you spoke about it in different fragments, but that might be.
Sure. Well, as I said, this was a tool that was primarily designed with individual protesters in mind, as I said, to kind of like cut out the middleman of them having to report potentially to courts or to institutions that might not be necessarily receptive to their stories. But this is essentially meant to empower them in the sense that they can use these tools to try and, in the best form possible and in the way that's best you know, most compliant with the documentation standards that we were talking about. They can kind of best explain what precisely happened and the types of injuries that they experienced and that the impact that that had on them. And it's then up to them to decide what they want to do with their story. So within the illustrated guidance itself, for example, we suggest that for certain individuals, their best venue is essentially to try and share this information as quickly as possible. You know, for some of them, there's a risk of their devices being seized or something like that. So it might be best for them to essentially share their story with a journalist or on social media. But it's also something that could be, as I mentioned, useful within your organizations in terms of thinking about, for those of you like a Tree of Life who deal with these kind of cases quite a lot, to think about if some of the expert guidance that we put into this can help sort of inform those processes or inform, say, your trainings with you know, national preventive mechanisms or other bodies. But also generally it might be something that's of use to you within your client pool. If you know individuals that are particularly exposed to you know, either participating in protests where this might often be a great risk to them, or also for those who've witnessed, who have, you know, loved ones or friends or whoever who've dealt with this kind of situation as well. The documentation forms are also written in such a way that they're meant to also facilitate recording stories about witnessing these kind of events as well. And as I mentioned, for the illustrated guidance in particular, it's really meant to be an easily shareable and readily accessible tool that you're able to share with individuals who are likely to be vulnerable to that kind of experience. But I mean, you're also welcome to use it in a variety of different ways. You know, it's a tool that's destined kind of both for you guys and for the public, and we'd be really interested to hear in your ideas about also how we can develop it further and how we can best put this to use. But we know that we have already heard some positive feedback from some partners based in Africa, actually, who have also mentioned to us about the upcoming election violence, but also in Latin America, for example, it's quite a common. It's something that they've experienced a lot over recent, well, for a long amount of time. But so we've been discussing with partners there, also doing kind of follow-up trainings in relation to this specific topic and to kind of explain how people can best use the tools. But yeah, essentially that's it.
Thanks a lot, Rhona. Anybody has questions, comments, thoughts? Please do share. I think, I mean, just from our side, one of the things that we have been struggling with is a little bit is how to best put it, what channels to use, but then also how to actually format it in a way so that it's easy to share. So if anybody has brilliant ideas, especially for the cartoons, we will be very happy to hear them. Right now, we have 25 minutes left, so I will just share my screen. Yes, bad connection. I can see it. Still bad connection. Or am I getting to now?
I think it's better now.
Yeah, now better.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll turn off my camera because I'm going to show a presentation in any case, and hopefully that will improve. Okay. So sorry about this. So we're going to be speaking now about the different opportunities at the UN and the EU. You have heard me speak many times, so I'm gonna I'm going to be very brief about the UN stuff, also because we are contacting members systematically every time there is an opportunity related to your country. So then you will also get the option to know. Can I just get a thumbs up if my audio is okay? Rhona, I can see you.
Thumbs up.
Lisa, good. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so just very briefly on the UN. The IRCT supports our members to engage with 4 to 5 different UN mechanisms that all review how individual countries implement their human rights. So we use these mechanisms as a way to put pressure on national governments to actually implement the specific policy priorities that our individual members may have in that country. So this is a program of support that we provide to all members that wish to avail themselves of it. We contact members when opportunities come up, but of course we also invite members to just participate in dialogues more generally. I'm gonna skip very quickly through this, and just to say that the program consists of 4 different components. The first is that we help to strategize about whether it is actually likely to be effective for the individual member to engage in a specific opportunity that arises. We help to develop written analysis and advocacy materials about national situations. How do you proceed upon by UN mechanisms? We help members go to Geneva to advocate both through logistical support, but also by having a staff there, using our network and our connections in Geneva so that you can get access. And finally, as something new, we have put in place a small grant scheme to help follow up when these recommendations are issued to your country. There will be small grants available to do immediate follow-up action so that we don't get delayed by having to first go out and look for funding and so on. So I know this is very superficial, but it's simply I think it's the program that's already described the most. So I would rather spend our time on the EU. So we are also developing an IRCT advocacy community on Fabo, where we will start out with hosting information and discussions and member-to-member interaction in relation to UN advocacy. So you can learn from your colleagues who have already done it and so on. So that will be launched very soon. And I think I will keep my comments on that. If people have specific questions, I'm of course always happy to answer. But otherwise, I'll just hand over to Dastan to go into a bit more detail on the EU part. So Dastan, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, it's nice to see you all. Yeah, so as Asger mentioned, I'll talk very briefly about the advocacy we do here at the EU. We have an actual physical space in Brussels. We are located in the heart of the European quarter. So I'll slow down, sorry.
Just show where we are, please.
Yeah, so if you just press forward once, Asger, you'll be able to see where we are. Yeah, so we are located in the heart of the European quarter with access to a lot of the key decision makers here. So if you do find yourself in Brussels, and it is an open invitation, you know you have a home here with us. Asger, if you could go to the next slide, please. So there are really 3 broad streams thematically of issues that we work on. First, we make sure that torture survivors who are in the European Union have access to appropriate rehabilitation services, and that as they go through the asylum process, they have procedures that are specifically adapted to them, and that they have recourse to reception facilities that are appropriate for a torture survivor. The second stream is that we try to advocate, or we try to leverage the EU as a global policy-making body, as the largest market in the world and as the largest funder of global aid in the world, having the EU prioritize the fight against torture has been a priority for us for since we've been here. And the third one related to that is not just in policy, but also that they allocate appropriate funds to ensure that that there is that the right to rehabilitation and the fight against torture globally are adequately funded. If I could have the next slide, please, Asger. So as mentioned, there are two streams, really, two pillars to the work here in Brussels. On the first one, we see that as kind of EU internal affairs. So that is anything related to countries inside of the European Union. This predominantly deals with what's known as the Common European Asylum System. So anything for the rights of torture survivors who are seeking asylum and protection inside the European Union. And the second one, as I just mentioned, is trying to leverage the EU as a global player to make sure that the fight against torture is prioritized in a policy perspective and also with funding. So in terms of internal affairs, yeah, you can go to the next slide, Asger, thanks. In terms of internal affairs, when we talk about the rights of victims of torture, we're talking about asylum seekers. And over the past, I think, 6 years, we've been engaged, or even longer, actually, we've been engaged very heavily in the multiple revisions of the Common European Asylum System. And the topics that we tend to work on are because we don't work on it as a totality. There are many organizations here that do, but the topics that we narrowly focus on is, one, the effective and early identification of victims of torture when they arrive in Europe. Two, making sure that they enter specialized procedures that are adapted and are trauma informed so that they have fair access to the asylum procedure. Third thing is to make sure that they have appropriate housing, appropriate access to food and health services. So those are really, I would say, the three main topics we work on. And early identification is really we like to say it's the key that unlocks all the other special support packages that in law, that they do have recourse to in law. To a lesser degree, we've also worked on advocating for the right of torture survivors to not be returned to countries where they don't have access to rehabilitation services. And then to a lesser extent, also around what's known, I won't go into that, the Dublin system, and of course, access to funding and looking at the nexus with mental health. That's very briefly on internal affairs. Now, the second pillar, which is the kind of the bulk of the work, if you could go to the next slide, Asger, is on how we advocate towards the EU as a global. I'm not seeing the slide. Go to the next. Maybe his connection is blocked. Anyway, it's okay. The second component, the larger component, is how we leverage the EU as a global player, and here we work, as mentioned, very much to ensure that the EU prioritizes the fight against torture and the rights of rehabilitation in its global relations with third countries, but also in multilateral institutions. And I should say here that in the past we'd had some difficulties in convincingly making that argument to the European Union. So until about 2 or 3 years ago, the EU had quite significantly, in my view, down prioritized the fight against torture, and they had in fact told us that their focus on the fight against torture would be viewed narrowly through the prism of prevention exclusively. Very thankfully, we have managed to convince them otherwise, to the extent that the EU's global human rights priorities now explicitly mentions torture, the fight against torture, as a very, very high priority, and explicitly also mentions the right to rehabilitation and reparations as one of their funding priorities. So that has been a process of concerted advocacy and lobbying from our end. And What that means, as you can see in the in the second point there, for the funding instruments, it means that because it's in one of their policy priorities, it will also become one of their funding priorities. And right now we are in the process of discussions with various entities inside the EU about the appropriate allocation of funds for what's known as, on your screen, you can see NDICI. So this will be the EU's flagship funding instrument for the years 2021 to 2027. And we're very pleased to say that the torture is high on the priority there. And I should say it's quite a big chunk of money. And most of the money will be spent in your regions. So they will be spent by local EU delegations. So this is a very good way for you to have a hook to potentially access EU funding. And I would highly encourage you to reach out to the delegations in your regions. They might not be in your country, but there will be an embassy somewhere, a delegation that is responsible for your country. So this would be a very concrete way for you to engage with EU institutions, and we're very happy to provide support in doing that. Another aspect or key way that we can help is the EU carries out what's known as human rights dialogues with some 35, 36 countries around the world. And these are bilateral dialogues with individual governments around the human rights situation in that country. And prior to those dialogues, civil society organizations get asked for input into them. So, and to just speak bluntly, I mean, generally speaking or broadly speaking, if we don't raise the issue of torture, it won't get raised by itself. So this is another way. And whenever these opportunities come up in relevant countries, we send a notification out to our members. And the only unfortunate thing is they come in with very short notice. So there's often a need to kind of react very quickly, though the amount of work it requires, it tends to be a bit more light touch. So if you do get an email like this, I would highly encourage you to participate, because it's a way for the EU to raise specifically the fight against torture in your country with counterparts in the government. I think finally, we also did some work some years ago on what's known as the EU guidelines on torture. I would encourage you to go look at what these are. They're basically guidelines for the EU embassies about how they can implement the fight against torture, how they can ensure that the fight against torture is appropriately prioritized in those countries. And the right to rehabilitation is mentioned here. So this could be a potentially good hook for you to contact one of the EU embassies with this in mind specifically. And occasionally we also get country-specific advocacy. So Brussels is a bubble with a lot of other international NGOs. So we've had experiences of connecting our members with other networks and other NGOs working on either similar thematic topics or country-specific focuses. And for that, we've also had some interesting examples. I think I'll leave it at there. I mean, those are kind of the opportunities, the two streams, and how you can engage with us in Brussels. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I think Andres has his hand up, actually.
Yes, thanks, Dastan. Andres, please go ahead. You have your hand up.
Sí, gracias. Señor, me disculpo porque no pude estar desde el comienzo. I'm sorry, I was, the internet doesn't function. Now I could do that, it's functioning. Sí. Tengo dos preguntas que están ligadas. La primera, ¿en qué medida los miembros del IRCT pueden influir en las políticas de apoyo? Porque a veces tengo la impresión que los conceptos donde deciden dar apoyo no tienen en cuenta muchos factores. ¿En qué medida el IRCT con sus miembros pueden influenciar en los fondos? El segundo punto es que el concepto para obtener fondos es tan sofisticado que las pequeñas organizaciones no hay esperanza. Ahora estamos en un proyecto porque es otra organización que se ocupa de todo la presentación del proyecto ante la Unión Europea, pero es tan sofisticado que para muchos es un camino inviable. Esas son las dos preguntas.
Thank you very much, Andres. Excellent questions. On the first one, in terms of how you can influence the policy dialogue, I think for me, the primary way and really the best, this is where we just don't have the capacity as a secretariat, but through your local delegations, this is the best way. They are in tune with, so these are the embassies that's responsible for Bolivia, for instance, in this instance. Most of the money that is allocated for human rights, 60% of it will be spent in the regions, which means if you are able to reach out and have a policy dialogue with the delegation in your region, this is a very effective way of ensuring that in there, and they develop, all of the delegations develop specific country human rights strategies, which will have a direct impact on the funding of human rights in your country. So my first recommendation would be to get in touch with the delegation. We, from Brussels, we get very little information in directly from the delegations. And the EU also has its list of priority countries that it engages with. And unfortunately, in the Latin American context, they're very often focused heavily on the aid and emergency situation related to refugees and IDPs in Colombia and Venezuela. So I don't know if that answers your question. On the second question on funding, I'm very happy to leave it to Lisa, but it is true, and it is a fact that accessing EU funding is incredibly complex, and it's something for you to think very careful about when you do if and when you do apply. But Lisa, I'm very happy to hand that one over to you as well.
No, I would just say, for those who would ask, what do we do with time in Brussels? There's been enough influence that now the right to rehabilitation is actually in the call. That wasn't there before. So that's because there's been concerted advocacy to insert. So that's there now. But as Dastan says, these EU calls, as all of us know, it's super complicated. You really have to be a strong organization to go for EU funding, right? So that's a fact. It's difficult. I think some of the things IRCT does will help to equip you to be that strong organization in future. So working concertedly with the standards that we have, working to respond to impact surveys, so we get our numbers in order, our data is collected. These are small steps on the way to being strong enough to apply or to be part of, hopefully, a call for proposals that if IRCT wins, which we're hoping to do, and be part of EU, we would be able to be using this as a platform to share that money out among our members. But even there, members have to be strong. So the capacity building we're offering, Andreas, this is also a way to get there. It's not like you're going to be fantastic by tomorrow, but along the way, attending IP trainings, actually sending staff to do some of the work with global standards. This helps us to improve. And in that improvement, we get to know members better. We're closer to members. There's going to be some virtual training going on, how to protect yourself as an organization, right? How to do financial reporting. These are things we offer. So that's a way to help your organization, even though you're small, potentially, to get better and to be better positioned to go for funding of this nature. I would just like to ask something totally different, but again, we're a global movement. And I've asked this, and I would please ask you, please rename yourself in the Zoom call. It's really interesting for people to be on a call to know from which countries other participants in the call come from. So we show this global movement. So your name, your country, and the name of your organization. It's just helpful so that people leaving this call know, I was just on a call with people from 10 countries, 20 countries, what have you. In general, with the IRCT calls, it's just a helpful way to feel that solidarity. Andreas, you're very far away from others on the call. So from Zimbabwe to Argentina to, this is fantastic. So if you have a chance, please, folks, you hover above your name and you can rename yourself. Yes, it's the last 4 minutes of the call, but still it's important. So those of you who've changed it already, thank you very much. Back to you, Asger. I don't know if there are any other questions or comments, but
I think there was one last part of Andreas' question, so I'll just try to address it and then I'll hand the floor back to Andreas if he has to follow on. So I think what I understood was that you were asking
¿Puedo
about
brevemente?
how to...
¿Puedo? Ya. Entonces, justo decir la primera respuesta, gracias por las respuestas de Lisa y de Dastan. Sobre el primer tema, yo no me imagino que podamos tener influencia pasando por una embajada. Puedo estar en error. Pero yo me imaginaba si el IRCT, bueno, aparece como una organización global, pero si como miembros se podría crear una opinión que compartimos ante la Unión Europea. Es una fantasía mía, no digo que tengo propuesta concreta, pero como miembros de la organización, ¿en qué medida podríamos tener posicionamientos de todos los países que están trabajando en el mundo, tocando puntos centrales? Gracias.
I think maybe Andres, just very specifically on we tried this, I think 1.5 years ago. We started a process of trying from the Secretariat to reach out to all the individual European embassies around the world with what you mentioned. We would send out a letter with a common letter, just specifically identified key causes and so on, and unfortunately it's completely failed because we couldn't get contacts to the relevant embassies. It's often people that change very frequently. In the end, we were invited to participate in one survey in Pakistan. That's kind of what it yielded. So it's very difficult to coordinate from the Secretariat, and very often the bottoms up approach is more effective. And I think I mean here I'm putting my successor maybe under the bus, but please do reach out to us, and we're happy to brainstorm ways that we can support you in those efforts. And of course, if there are broader, there are always kind of calls for solidarity, expressions of interest around torture globally. And of course, we're very happy to brainstorm ways about the way we can use the voice of the membership to really highlight torture. And as Lisa mentioned, in terms of policy and funding right now, we're reasonably well taken care of, and that is good news. But of course, like you mentioned, Andres, we do need to make sure that we keep using our collective voice to make sure that continues to happen.
Thanks, Dastan. Maha, this is it's too late for you to run away, just to warn you. So now Dastan handed over I think, Andreas, just to respond to your poll, the other part, I think it is, of course, a big problem now that the EU is shifting more and more funds out to the local embassies, that they keep on having these extremely difficult application formats. I think if the IRCT membership wanted to say something about that as a membership, it's really just about launching the idea and seeing whether members will sign on to a short letter that could be sent. The EU is a very, very big machine, but it never hurts. You certainly don't get anything if you don't ask. So I don't see why we wouldn't try to, if that is something that the broader membership, that's how you raised it, right? That the members would take action. So if it's something that the broader membership would want to actually engage on sending a letter to either to the EU in Brussels or to individual embassies, all encouraging them to simplify the application format and the process, I think that we can certainly help coordinate. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to read messages in the sidebar while speaking about moderating, I guess. So thanks, Susan, for your message. I'll follow up. And I think anybody else would like to intervene at this point. Otherwise, we are at the end of the meeting, and I don't see anybody, so I would just like to take the opportunity, first of all, to thank all of you for coming, to thank the interpreters, because without you, we can all sit here on Zoom, but we can't communicate. So you're the glue that keeps us together. And really, well, I'm going to start with a very warm welcome to Maha. It's so great to have you on board, and we really look forward to May when you will start. So you will all hear a lot more from Maha.
I think we lost him.
I think you're cut. I think Asger's, he's been cut off. And so we are just going to say thank you very much for attending. Great to have Maha on board. Everyone say goodbye to Dastan. This is maybe the last time you'll see him because we're saying goodbye to him on Friday. It's been a phenomenal piece of work through the past 6 years, as we hope you think. We think so, but he's ending by getting rehabilitation into the call for this big global call for torture, and let's hope we get some legs and get some traction on that one to get money out to the center. So thank you very much, all of you, and it was nice to listen to you and hear your words of support. Give a shout if you need help. We're all here to help.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
so much.
Follow us on
Everyone.
Instagram.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.